The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal dirge across the polished floors of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. At 500 hours, while the elite Navy SEALs prepared for another day of pushing human limits, Reina Viper Castellanos pushed a mop bucket down the sterile corridors they would soon thunder through with their size 12 boots and oversized egos. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once commanded the sky in an FA-18 Super Hornet, her call sign earned through lightning-fast reflexes and a strike accuracy that made senior officers nervous. Now, at 34, she commanded nothing more than industrial-grade cleaning supplies and the invisible respect of night-shift security guards who nodded as she passed. The SEALs saw her as furniture, obstacle, the quiet woman who emptied their trash while they debriefed classified operations, speaking in coded language they assumed she couldn't understand. They had no idea she'd held top-secret SCI clearance for 8 years, or that her discharge papers bore the weight of an incident that still classified her nightmares. To them, she was just another Pentagon budget cut made flesh, a broken-down veteran grateful for any federal job that came with basic health care. "Morning, janitor lady," called out Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb as he strutted past, his trident gleaming against his dress uniform. His teammates snickered, adding their own creative variations. Raina kept mopping, her calloused hands steady on the handle, her dark eyes focused on removing every trace of their presence from the tile. She'd learned long ago that invisibility was its own kind of armor. But this morning felt different. The base buzzed with an undercurrent of tension she recognized from her flying days, the electric anticipation that preceded classified briefings and black operations. Senior officers moved with purpose down halls they usually strolled. Encrypted radios crackled more frequently. Even the cleaning supply closet seemed to hold its breath. What none of them knew, what would only surface when a military investigator cross-referenced personnel files 3 weeks later, was that Staff Sergeant Reina Castellanos, call sign Viper, wasn't just on the base employment roster. Her name appeared on a document so classified that only 12 people in the Department of Defense had clearance to read it. A document that would transform their mockery into something approaching reverence, their laughter into silence thick with uncomfortable recognition. The bucket's wheels squeaked as she turned the corner toward the briefing rooms, unaware that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to shatter against the hard reality of a mission that would need her specific, irreplaceable skills. Skills the SEALs had never imagined their janitor lady possessed. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen burst through the double doors of SEAL Team 7's briefing room like a woman possessed, her usually pristine uniform slightly wrinkled from an all-night intelligence review. The assembled operators, midway through their morning coffee and casual banter about the previous night's bar conquest stories, straightened with the automatic discipline that 17 weeks of hell had beaten into their DNA. Chen's reputation preceded her, former CIA liaison, current Naval Special Warfare Command Operations Officer, and someone who didn't waste time on pleasantries when American lives hung in the balance. "Gentlemen, we have a problem." She activated the wall-mounted display, revealing satellite imagery of a compound nestled in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. 72 hours ago, a joint CAISI operation went sideways in the Hindu Kush. 8 agency assets are trapped in a Taliban stronghold, including 2 American citizens whose identities remain classified above your pay grade. Standard extraction protocols have failed. The terrain is too hostile for conventional helicopter insertion, too heavily defended for ground assault, and too politically sensitive for massive airstrikes. Petty Officer Webb leaned forward, his earlier swagger replaced by professional focus. "What's our window, ma'am?" 18 hours before the Taliban moves them to an undisclosed location across the Pakistani border. After that, they disappear into a network we've been trying to penetrate for 3 years. Chen's finger traced the compound's perimeter on the screen. The facility sits at 12,000 feet elevation, surrounded by SAM sites and heavy machine gun nests. Weather reports indicate zero visibility conditions, mountain fog so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of training exercises echoing from the beach. These men had survived impossible missions before, but the parameters Chen outlined skirted the edge of suicide. High-altitude defended targets, near-zero visibility, compressed timeline. Each factor alone was manageable, but combined they created a tactical nightmare. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's senior enlisted leader, studied the imagery with the calculating gaze of a man who'd survived 12 deployments. "We'll need someone who can thread the needle in that soup, ma'am. Our best helicopter pilots are good, but this requires something beyond good. This requires surgical precision in conditions that would ground commercial aircraft." Chen nodded, her expression grim. "The Pentagon agrees. They've identified a pilot qualified for this specific mission profile: high altitude, low visibility, precision insertion into hostile territory." She paused, consulting her classified tablet. "The pilot has been read into the operation and is currently on base." Excitement rippled through the room. Elite pilots were the stuff of SEAL legend, the crazy bastards who would fly into hell itself if the mission demanded it. Webb grinned at his teammates. "Please tell me it's Maverick himself." Chen's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or anticipation of the reaction to come. "The pilot's call sign is Viper." The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Raina's face as she guided her mop bucket into the supply closet. The familiar ritual of returning her equipment, a welcome constant in a life that had been stripped of most certainties. The base's morning routine continued around her. Administrative personnel arriving for their shifts, training instructors preparing for the day's torture sessions, and the endless parade of young sailors who still believed in the mythology of modern warfare. She'd once shared that mythology, back when her FA-18 Super Hornet had been an extension of her will, and the sky her personal domain. Her discharge hadn't been dishonorable, merely inevitable. The incident over the Persian Gulf, classified at levels that ensured she could never fully explain herself to family or friends, had ended her flying career with bureaucratic efficiency. 8 years of exemplary service, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Distinguished Flying Cross reduced to a personnel file note about medical limitations that effectively grounded her forever. The VA had offered counseling, disability compensation, and a generous settlement in exchange for her silence about operational details that would remain buried in Pentagon archives for the next 50 years. She'd taken the janitorial position because it kept her close to the military community, the only world that made sense anymore. The pay was sufficient, the work honest, and most importantly, it rendered her effectively invisible to the same system that had once celebrated her skills. The SEALs' casual mockery actually provided a strange comfort. Their dismissal confirmed that her cover story was complete, that Staff Sergeant Reina Castellanos had successfully transformed into just another veteran cleaning up after America's elite warriors. The supply closet door clicked shut behind her as she secured the mop and bucket, her movements automatic from months of repetition. Through the thin walls, she could hear muffled voices from the briefing room next door. Not unusual, given the SEALs' constant training schedule and operational tempo. But something in the cadence of the conversation made her pause, her pilot's instincts recognizing the particular urgency that accompanied real-world mission planning. She pressed her ear against the wall, a habit from her flying days when situational awareness meant the difference between returning to base or becoming a memorial wall statistic. The voices were too muffled for specific words, but the tone was unmistakable, time-compressed, detail-focused, life and death serious. Someone was planning something dangerous, something that required the kind of precision and expertise that had once defined her existence. Her hand unconsciously moved to her left shoulder, where her flight suit patch had once displayed her call sign and wings. Now there was only the generic uniform of a federal cleaning contractor, but muscle memory died hard. Lieutenant Commander Chen's voice carried through the briefing room door with crystalline authority, each word carefully chosen to convey maximum information with minimum ambiguity. The assembled SEALs leaned forward in their chairs, coffee forgotten, as operational details transformed abstract mission parameters into stark reality. The satellite imagery continued cycling through different perspectives of the target compound, each angle revealing new defensive complications and tactical challenges that would require flawless execution under impossible conditions. The compound's elevation presents significant atmospheric challenges, Chen continued, highlighting topographical features with her laser pointer. At 12,000 feet, helicopter performance degrades substantially. Rotor efficiency drops, engine power decreases, and pilot response time increases. Combined with the forecasted weather conditions, we're operating at the absolute margins of rotor craft capabilities. Petty Officer First Class Martinez, the team's communications specialist, raised his hand. "Ma'am, have we considered alternative insertion methods? Halo drop, perhaps, or mountain climbing approach?" Chen shook her head. "Negative. The timeline is too compressed for ground infiltration, and the terrain is unsuitable for parachute operations. Weather reports indicate sustained winds exceeding 40 knots with severe turbulence. The only viable approach is direct helicopter insertion, followed by immediate extraction upon mission completion." Chief Rodriguez studied the imagery with the methodical attention of a professional warrior. "This pilot, Viper, what's their operational background? We need to understand their experience with this type of mission profile." "Classified," Chen replied, though her tone suggested there was more to the story. "What I can tell you is that Viper has extensive experience with high-risk insertions in contested airspace, multiple decorations for valor under fire, perfect safety record, and specific qualifications for the aircraft we'll be using." Webb exchanged glances with his teammates, the earlier levity completely forgotten. "When do we brief with the pilot?" Chen checked her watch, 0630 hours, with mission launch scheduled for 1800 hours that evening to take advantage of darkness over the target area. "Viper is being briefed separately on flight-specific parameters. You'll meet during final coordination at 1400 hours." She paused, her expression becoming even more serious. "Gentlemen, I cannot overstate the importance of this mission. 8 American lives depend on flawless execution of a plan that pushes every capability we possess to its absolute limit. There is no margin for error, no backup plan, and no second chances." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of ocean waves breaking against Coronado's beaches. These men had signed up for impossible missions, but the weight of Chen's words settled over them like morning fog, thick, cold, and unforgiving. The base's afternoon shift change brought fresh energy to corridors that had already witnessed 12 hours of controlled military chaos. Raina maneuvered her cart through the maze of administrative offices, her practiced efficiency allowing her mind to wander while her hands performed familiar tasks. The morning's overheard conversation fragments continued nagging at her consciousness, something about high altitude, classified operations, and helicopter insertions. The kind of mission profile that had once been her specialty, back when she'd been considered one of the Navy's most capable rotorcraft pilots. Her transition from fixed-wing to rotorcraft had occurred during her 6th year of service, when a senior instructor had noticed her intuitive understanding of flight dynamics in challenging conditions. Helicopter operations required different skills than jets: less raw speed, more finesse, the ability to hover motionless in space while making split-second adjustments for wind, terrain, and tactical considerations. She'd excelled at it, earning her advanced qualifications on multiple airframes including the MH-60 Black Hawk, AH-1Z Viper, and even classified variants whose designations remained buried in Pentagon procurement documents. The incident that ended her career had involved one of those classified variants during a night insertion into hostile territory. Details remained locked behind security classifications that would outlive her, but the aftermath had been swift and final. Medical review boards, psychological evaluations, and ultimately a determination that her specific combination of skills and knowledge made her too valuable to risk but too compromised to employ. The military's solution had been elegant in its bureaucratic ruthlessness: honorable discharge with full benefits, conditional on her agreement to maintain operational security for the remainder of her natural life. She'd kept that agreement faithfully, even when former colleagues reached out through back channels, even when defense contractors offered lucrative positions that would have restored some measure of her former identity. The price of silence was isolation, but it was a price she'd chosen to pay rather than compromise national security or betray the trust of operators who depended on her skills in life-and-death situations. A commotion from the direction of the briefing rooms interrupted her thoughts. Voices carried down the corridor, urgent, focused, professional. She recognized the tone from countless pre-mission briefings, the particular intensity that accompanied operations where failure meant body bags and congressional investigations. Her instincts, dormant for months but never truly dead, began stirring to life. The supply closet, adjacent to Briefing Room Alpha, had become her inadvertent intelligence-gathering post, a position she'd never actively sought, but couldn't resist utilizing when circumstances presented themselves. The afternoon briefing session had transformed Briefing Room Alpha into a tactical operations center, with additional personnel arriving throughout the day to coordinate various aspects of the rescue mission. Raina had observed the steady stream of senior officers, intelligence analysts, and support staff flowing past her mopping station, each carrying classified folders and wearing expressions that suggested the weight of significant responsibility. The base's usual training routine had been subtly altered to accommodate this higher priority operation, with certain corridors temporarily restricted and additional security posted at key access points. Lieutenant Commander Chen stood at the head of a conference table now crowded with detailed maps, satellite photographs, and technical specifications for multiple aircraft types. The assembled SEAL team members had been joined by additional support personnel, communications specialists, medical officers, and technical experts, whose presence indicated the mission's complexity extended far beyond simple personnel recovery. The atmosphere was thick with concentration and barely controlled tension. Latest intelligence update indicates the weather window is narrowing, Chen announced, consulting fresh meteorological data. Mountain fog is expected to persist through the evening hours, but wind patterns suggest a brief clearing around 200 local time. That gives us approximately 30 minutes to execute insertion, conduct the rescue, and extract before conditions deteriorate again. Chief Rodriguez traced potential approach routes on the tactical map, his experienced fingers identifying terrain features that could provide concealment or present hazards. 30 minutes is tight, ma'am. If we encounter unexpected resistance, or if the hostages require medical attention, our timeline becomes even more compressed. Understood, Chen replied. Which is why pilot selection becomes critical. We need someone who can maintain position in zero visibility conditions, execute precision maneuvers within feet of hostile positions, and extract under fire if necessary. She paused, her gaze moving across the faces of men who'd built careers on impossible missions. The pilot we've selected has extensive experience with these exact parameters. Webb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. With respect, ma'am, we've worked with a lot of good pilots, but this mission profile seems to require something beyond good. We're talking about flying blind in mountain terrain, against defended positions, with American lives in the balance. That's not a job for anyone except the absolute best. Chen nodded slowly, her expression suggesting she understood their concerns completely. The pilot's qualifications are appropriate to the mission requirements. Call sign Viper, formerly attached to naval special warfare units, with specific experience in high-risk insertions under adverse conditions. She checked her watch. Final coordination briefing begins at 1400 hours. You'll meet Viper then and can assess capabilities personally. The room fell silent except for the sound of papers rustling and chairs creaking under the weight of men processing information that would soon translate into life-and-death decisions in hostile territory 12,000 feet above sea level. The base's administrative offices emptied as the lunch hour approached, leaving Reyna alone with her thoughts and the persistent echo of overheard conversation fragments. Her morning's eavesdropping had provided tantalizing hints about the developing operation: helicopter insertion, hostile territory, compressed timeline, and most intriguingly, a pilot with call sign Viper. The coincidence struck her as cosmically improbable, given that her own call sign had been retired along with her security clearances 8 months earlier. She'd earned that call sign during her third deployment, when a surface-to-air missile had forced her to execute an emergency landing in contested territory. With her aircraft damaged beyond repair and enemy forces converging on her position, she'd remained calm enough to coordinate her own rescue while providing overwatch for the extraction team. The mission commander had noted that she'd struck with precision and vanished like smoke, leaving only destroyed enemy equipment as evidence of her presence. The comparison to a Viper, sudden deadly, then gone, had seemed appropriate enough to stick. But call signs were military property, not personal identity markers. The Pentagon recycled them regularly, assigning successful designations to new pilots who showed promise or particular aptitude. Another aviator had undoubtedly inherited Viper, someone whose skills matched the operational requirements Chen had outlined in her briefing. Someone who could fly blind through mountain terrain, execute precision maneuvers under fire, and extract personnel from defended positions. The irony was perfect in its cruelty. Somewhere on this base, another pilot was preparing for exactly the kind of mission that had once defined her existence. They would receive detailed briefings, study satellite imagery, coordinate with ground teams, and experience the particular combination of terror and exhilaration that accompanied high-stakes operations. Meanwhile, she would continue pushing mops and emptying trash cans, invisible to the very system that had once considered her skills irreplaceable. Her personal radio crackled to life, startling her from these uncomfortable reflections. Castellanos, report to Administration Building, Room 201, immediate. The summons was unusual. Her supervisor typically communicated through daily task assignments rather than direct radio calls. Room 201 housed Personnel Administration, the bureaucratic heart of base operations where careers were managed and official business conducted. She couldn't imagine why a cleaning contractor would be needed there during business hours, unless someone had filed a complaint about her work performance or noticed her habit of lingering near briefing rooms. She secured her equipment and began walking toward the administration building, her mind cycling through possible explanations for the unexpected summons. Personnel issue, security concern, routine administrative update. None seemed particularly likely given her low profile and consistent work record. Lieutenant Commander Chen stood outside room 201, studying classified documents that she quickly secured in a manila folder upon Reyna's approach. Her expression was professionally neutral, revealing nothing about the purpose of this meeting or the reason for the unusual location. The corridor was empty except for them, creating an atmosphere of privacy that seemed unnecessary for routine administrative matters. "Ms. Castellanos," Chen said, her voice carrying undertones of something Reyna couldn't identify, anticipation perhaps, or carefully controlled excitement. "Thank you for responding promptly. We need to discuss a matter of some importance." Chen opened the door to room 201, revealing a small conference room equipped with secure communications equipment and wall-mounted displays currently showing classified headers. This was not routine personnel administration. This was a briefing facility used for sensitive military business. Raina hesitated in the doorway, uncertain why a cleaning contractor would be brought to such a location. "Please have a seat," Chen continued, gesturing to a chair positioned facing the main display screen. "We have some questions about your background and qualifications." The words hit Raina like ice water, confirming her worst fears about discovery and exposure. Someone had connected her current identity with her former military service, breaking through the carefully constructed cover story that had protected her for 8 months. Her throat felt dry as she took the indicated seat, her hands folded in her lap to prevent any nervous fidgeting that might betray her growing anxiety. Chen activated the display screen, revealing a personnel file that Raina recognized with sinking certainty, her own military record, complete with flight qualifications, operational history, and the classification markings that had sealed her fate. Photos from her active duty years showed a different person, confident, decorated, surrounded by the aircraft and equipment that had defined her identity. The contrast with her current situation was stark enough to be painful. "Staff Sergeant Reina Castellanos, call sign Viper," Chen read from the file. 8 years active duty, multiple deployments, qualified on 6 different aircraft types including advanced rotorcraft platforms. Bronze Star with Valor Device, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with Combat V. She looked up from the documents. Quite an impressive record for someone currently employed as a janitor. Raina remained silent, her training asserting itself despite the civilian clothes and mop bucket that had become her uniform. Military bearing was muscle memory, impossible to completely abandon even when circumstances demanded invisibility. She straightened slightly in her chair, meeting Chen's gaze directly. "According to your file, you maintained top-secret SCI clearances until your discharge 8 months ago," Chen continued. "The circumstances of that discharge are classified above my clearance level, but the notation indicates it was not related to performance or disciplinary issues." She paused, studying Raina's face for reactions. "Your qualifications include advanced helicopter operations in contested environments, low-visibility insertions, and high-altitude operations." The room fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and distant sounds of base activity filtering through closed windows. Raina felt the weight of her carefully maintained anonymity crumbling, exposing skills and knowledge that she'd spent months learning to suppress. Her agreement with the Pentagon had been clear: silence in exchange for benefits and protection from further scrutiny. "Ms. Castellanos," Chen said quietly, "we need to discuss a mission." The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence, carrying implications that transformed the sterile conference room into something approaching sacred space. Mission, the term that had once defined every aspect of Raina's existence, that had justified years of training, months of deployment, and ultimately the incident that ended her career. She'd thought that word was permanently removed from her vocabulary, relegated to memory along with flight suits and aircraft pre-flight checklists. Chen leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. 8 American lives are at risk in Afghanistan. The rescue operation requires specific pilot qualifications that match your background exactly. She gestured toward the personnel file still displayed on the screen. High-altitude helicopter insertion, zero visibility conditions, precision maneuvering in contested airspace. The mission profile fits your experience base perfectly. Raina found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Ma'am, my clearances were revoked. I'm not qualified for classified operations." The words tasted bitter, acknowledging limitations that had been imposed rather than earned. "Your clearances have been temporarily restored for this specific mission," Chen replied, producing additional documents from her folder. "Pentagon authorization came through this morning. You're being recalled to active duty status for the duration of this operation." She paused, allowing the implications to settle. "The question is whether you're willing to accept the assignment." The question struck Raina like a physical blow, reopening emotional wounds that had barely begun to heal. For 8 months, she'd convinced herself that her flying career was permanently finished, that the skills and knowledge accumulated over years of training would remain forever dormant. The possibility of returning to an aircraft, even temporarily, was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. The timeline is compressed, Chen continued. Mission launch is scheduled for 1800 hours today. That gives us 6 hours to brief you on operational details, coordinate with the ground team, and prepare aircraft. She studied Raina's face carefully. This isn't a request, Sergeant. 8 Americans are going to die without intervention, and you're the only pilot on the continent qualified for this particular insertion profile. Raina's hands trembled slightly as she processed the magnitude of what was being asked. Return to military status, accept responsibility for American lives, execute a mission profile that pushed helicopter capabilities to their absolute limits, all within 6 hours of learning such an operation existed. What aircraft? She asked, her pilot's instincts overwhelming personal reservations. Chen smiled for the first time since the conversation began. MH-60M Black Hawk modified for special operations. You're qualified on the platform and it's configured specifically for this mission profile. She activated another display screen, showing technical specifications and performance data. Full defensive suite, upgraded engines, extended range fuel tanks, everything you'll need to get in and get out. The familiar aircraft specifications drew Raina forward in her chair, her professional interest overriding emotional uncertainty. She'd flown the MH-60M extensively during her final years of service, mastering its capabilities and limitations through hundreds of hours in various operational environments. It was a capable platform, sophisticated enough to execute complex missions, but forgiving enough to survive pilot error under stress. Weather conditions, she asked, already beginning the mental transition from janitor to military aviator. Marginal at best, mountain fog, high winds, near zero visibility. You'll be flying entirely on instruments until the final approach. Chen's expression became grimmer. The insertion site is defended, so expect ground fire during the approach and extraction phases. Raina nodded slowly, her mind automatically calculating flight parameters and tactical considerations. High altitude reduced helicopter performance while increasing pilot workload. Low visibility eliminated visual references that made precision maneuvering possible. Defended targets meant accepting the possibility of aircraft damage or worse during the most vulnerable phases of the mission. The ground team, she asked. SEAL Team 7. Experienced operators, but they'll be depending entirely on your ability to get them in and out safely. Chen paused. They don't know about your background yet. As far as they're concerned, you're just another pilot assigned to the mission. The irony was perfect. The same SEALs who'd spent months dismissing her as janitor lady would be trusting their lives to her flying skills within hours. She wondered if they would recognize her during the briefing, or if her transformation had been complete enough to maintain the illusion of anonymity. Chen stood, gathering her documents with the efficient movements of a military officer operating under time pressure. Sergeant Castellanos, I need your answer. Will you accept this assignment? Raina looked at the aircraft specifications still displayed on the screen, then at her own personnel file with its record of successful missions and decorations for valor under fire. 8 Americans were depending on her decision, along with a SEAL team that had no idea their lives would soon be in the hands of the woman they'd spent months mocking. She stood as well, feeling military bearing reassert itself after months of suppression. Yes, ma'am, I accept. The transformation from civilian contractor to military aviator began immediately, with Chen escorting Raina to a secure equipment facility where her flight gear had already been prepared. The familiar weight of a flight suit felt strange after 8 months in civilian clothes, but muscle memory guided her through equipment checks and fitting procedures that had once been daily routine. Her name tape read CASTLLANOS in block letters, with Viper embroidered below. Call signs never truly disappeared from military inventory, merely waited for circumstances to require their resurrection. The equipment facility bustled with pre-mission activity as support personnel prepared specialized gear for the rescue operation. Night vision goggles, survival equipment, communications gear, and medical supplies were checked, double-checked, and loaded into carrying cases with the methodical precision that characterized military operations. Raina recognized the controlled chaos from her previous deployments, when similar preparations had preceded missions over Iraq, Afghanistan, and other locations whose names remained classified. Her helmet was exactly as she'd left it, minus the unit patches and personal modifications that had marked her previous assignments. The interior foam still retained the shape of her head from hundreds of hours of flight time, and the communication system activated with the familiar electronic chirp she'd heard thousands of times before. The weight distribution was perfect, balanced for extended operations without causing neck strain or pressure points that could distract from flight operations. Aircraft is pre-positioned at the flight line, Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, the senior maintenance officer, informed her as she completed equipment fitting. Full pre-flight inspection completed, all systems nominal, fuel load calculated for mission profile with 20% reserve. He handed her a thick folder containing aircraft specifications, performance charts, and maintenance records. "She's ready to fly, ma'am." The formality felt surreal after months of being addressed by first name or not addressed at all. Military courtesy was another form of muscle memory, asserting itself automatically when circumstances demanded professional interaction. She accepted the folder and began reviewing its contents, her pilot's training taking precedence over personal uncertainty about returning to active operations. The MH-60M specifications were impressive: upgraded engines providing additional power at altitude, advanced avionics suite for all-weather operations, defensive systems capable of defeating most shoulder-fired missiles. The particular aircraft assigned to her mission had been modified with extended-range fuel tanks and additional communication equipment, suggesting this rescue operation was expected to push performance envelopes in multiple areas simultaneously. "Any maintenance issues I should know about?" she asked, reviewing the aircraft's logbook entries from the previous week's operations. "None, ma'am. This bird just completed phase inspection 2 weeks ago. All systems are green, and she's been configured specifically for high-altitude operations." Martinez paused, studying her face with the curious expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "If you don't mind me asking, ma'am, what unit were you with before?" The question carried innocent curiosity, but Raina recognized the potential complications of revealing too much about her background. Her previous assignments had been largely classified, and even unclassified details could compromise operational security if they suggested capabilities or mission profiles that remained sensitive. "Various assignments," she replied diplomatically. "Nothing you'd be familiar with." Martinez nodded, accepting the deflection with professional courtesy. Military personnel learned early that some questions weren't meant to be answered, and that operational security often required vague responses to legitimate inquiries. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as Raina made her way toward Briefing Room Alpha, her flight gear creating the familiar weight distribution that had once been second nature. The base's routine operations continued around her, but she noticed increased security presence and subtle indicators of heightened alert status: additional patrols, restricted access areas, and senior officers moving with the purposeful stride that accompanied real-world missions. Her reflection in the building's glass doors showed a person she hadn't seen for 8 months, a military aviator prepared for combat operations, bearing the equipment and bearing that distinguished active personnel from civilian contractors. The transformation was complete, except for the uncertainty that still gnawed at her confidence, the knowledge that her skills had remained dormant long enough to potentially compromise performance when lives depended on flawless execution. The briefing room door was closed, with voices audible from within indicating the meeting was already in progress. She paused momentarily, gathering courage for a reunion with SEALs who knew her only as the invisible woman who cleaned their workspace. Their reaction would determine whether this mission began with professional respect or required her to earn credibility under compressed timeline conditions. She knocked twice and entered without waiting for a response, military protocol asserting itself automatically. The room fell silent as 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her, expressions ranging from confusion to recognition to something approaching shock. Lieutenant Commander Chen stood at the head of the conference table, while the assembled SEAL team members sat frozen in attitudes of disbelief. Petty Officer First Class Webb was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Holy shit." "Language," Chen said automatically, though her own expression suggested she was enjoying the moment. "Gentlemen, meet your pilot, Staff Sergeant Reina Castellanos, call sign Viper." The silence stretched uncomfortably as the SEALs processed this revelation, their worldview adjusting to accommodate the reality that their janitor lady was actually a decorated military aviator qualified for the most dangerous flying missions the Pentagon could devise. Years of casual mockery and dismissive treatment suddenly took on different implications, their assumptions about her background and capabilities crumbling in the face of evidence they couldn't dispute. Chief Rodriguez was the first to recover his composure, standing with the automatic courtesy due to a fellow warrior regardless of service branch or current circumstances. "Ma'am," he said simply, his tone carrying none of the condescension that had characterized previous interactions. The rest of the team followed his lead, rising from their chairs with expressions that suggested they were still processing the magnitude of their mistake. Reina took the empty seat at the conference table, noting how the room's dynamic had shifted completely with her revealed identity. Chen activated the main display screen, showing detailed satellite imagery of the target compound. "Now that we're all properly introduced, let's discuss how we're going to bring 8 Americans home." The mission briefing transformed into a collaborative planning session, as Reina's presence shifted the team dynamic from skepticism to professional focus. Her questions about flight parameters, weather conditions, and tactical considerations demonstrated expertise that the SEALs recognized immediately, their earlier assumptions about her capabilities dissolving in the face of technical competence that matched their own professional standards. "Approach route needs to avoid the Eastern Ridge Line," she said, studying topographical maps with the calculating gaze of someone who'd navigated similar terrain under combat conditions. "SAM site's position there can track inbound aircraft for 12 miles. Better to use the valley system, even though it adds complexity to the insertion." Webb leaned forward, his earlier swagger replaced by genuine interest in her tactical assessment. "What about extraction? If we're taking fire during the pickup, can you maintain position long enough for us to get all 8 hostages aboard?" "Depends on the nature of the fire," she replied honestly. "Small arms, yes. Heavy machine guns or RPGs will need to be creative about timing and positioning." She traced potential extraction routes on the map. "Multiple pickup points might be necessary if the primary site becomes untenable." Chief Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Ma'am, what's your experience with missions of this type?" The question was loaded with implications about trust, competence, and the particular bond that formed between aviators and ground personnel when lives depended on mutual performance. Reina recognized the weight behind his inquiry. He needed to know whether his team could depend on her skills when circumstances became desperate. "Classified," she replied, though her tone suggested extensive background in similar operations. What I can tell you is that I've extracted personnel from defended positions under adverse conditions. Multiple deployments, various aircraft types, no mission failures. The last statement carried particular significance in military culture, where mission success was the ultimate measure of professional competence. The SEALs exchanged glances that suggested her response had earned provisional acceptance, though full trust would require demonstration under actual combat conditions. Chen interrupted the tactical discussion to address timeline concerns. Mission launch is scheduled for 1800 hours, with insertion planned for 200 local time. That gives us 4 hours to complete mission planning, conduct final equipment checks, and position the aircraft for departure. She consulted her classified tablet. Weather.